We did it. We delivered the mother of all deals. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and, of course, India and the European Union, they announced the conclusion of the finalisation of negotiations for a free trade agreement. Prime Minister Narendra Modi described an agreement that's expected to be signed, of course, later this year and may come into force early next year as the biggest for India. Union Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal spoke of benefits to the labour-intensive textile, leather, marine products, handicraft, gems and jewelries. And of course, when it comes to Europe, their cars, wines and spirits, they get greater access to Indian markets in a phased manner. But will the defense and security agreement bring cutting-edge defense technology and manufacturing to India? We get you more in this report.
Prime Minister, distinguished friend, we did it. We delivered the mother of all deals.
आज भारत ने अपने इतिहास का अब तक का सबसे बड़ा फ्री ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट संपन्न किया है.
India and the European Union have now inked what's been called the mother of all deals, a mega free trade agreement. All it took was one strong nudge from the United States to bring it to the finish line. This is among India's most ambitious trade pacts, with comparisons already being made to the game-changing 1991 reforms.
फ्रेंड्स, आज की इन उपलब्धियों के आधार पर हम अगले 5 वर्ष के लिए एक और भी एम्बिशियस और होलिस्टिक स्ट्रेटेजिक एजेंडा लॉन्च कर रहे हैं. एक जटिल वैश्विक वातावरण में ये एजेंडा स्पष्ट दिशा देगा, हमारी साझा समृद्धि को आगे बढ़ाएगा.
Prime Minister, distinguished friend, we did it. We delivered the mother of all deals. We are creating a market of 2 billion people. And this is the tale of two giants, the world's second and fourth largest economies, two giants who choose partnership in a true win-win fashion.
The deal is massive in scale. It covers nearly 1/3 of the world's total trade and represents 25% of global GDP. The world's second and fourth largest economies will now work forward together in a single trade framework. The biggest win for India is exports. The agreement offers preferential access to a $75 billion export market, catering to a 25% of the global GDP. And the headline number, tariffs have been eliminated on 9,425 Indian export lines. On tariffs, it's a major give and take. India proposes deep duty cuts on key EU imports, pharma, olive oil, steel, chemicals and aircraft to 0, cars down to 10%. In return, the EU will cut duty on 99% of Indian exports, which is a big boost for textiles, footwear, marine and SMEs. But sensitive sectors remain protected. India has kept agriculture, dairy and steel out, while the EU has shielded rice, sugar, beef and chicken.
It is our 8th free trade agreement under Prime Minister Narendra Modi, each and every one of them with developed nations and collectively reflecting an agreement between India and 36 developed nations. This agreement covers almost 99% of the total exports that are sent from India to the European Union and about 97% plus of the total exports.
Strategically, the partnership deepens beyond commerce into clean energy, climate transition funding, defense cooperation, maritime security, cyber security and innovation.
रक्षा और सुरक्षा सहयोग किसी भी स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप की नींव होती है और आज हम इसे सिक्योरिटी एंड डिफेंस पार्टनरशिप के जरिए औपचारिक रूप दे रहे हैं. इससे काउंटर टेररिज्म, मैरीटाइम और साइबर सिक्योरिटी में हमारी साझेदारी और गहरी होगी.
Will help to build each other's resilience. Europe and India have a long history of cooperation in the defense industry. Now we will enhance this teamwork even further. We will deepen our cooperation on maritime security, for example, joint naval exercises to tackle piracy. And we will step up our work on countering cyber and hybrid threats.
But the scale of the deal has triggered pushback in Washington. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has accused Europe of funding the war against themselves.
The U.S. has made much bigger sacrifices than the Europeans have. We have put 25% tariffs on India for buying Russian oil. Guess what happened last week? The Europeans signed a trade deal with India.
This just days after an audio recording of Senator Ted Cruz surfaced, where he claimed that he was battling the White House on the stalled India-US trade understanding, naming advisor Peter Navarro, Vice President J.D. Vance, and even at times Trump as roadblocks. Bottom line, India and the EU are calling it historic, a boost to exports, manufacturing and skills, and a partnership powerful enough to reshape the global economic order. With Siddharth Zarabi and Geeta Mohan, Bureau Report, India Today.
And India Today's Foreign Affairs editor Geeta Mohan spoke exclusively to European Commission's Vice President on the India-EU agreements. She welcomed the deal, saying stronger trade between India and Europe benefit both sides. Listen in.
After a lot of strain in ties between India and the European Union, we're now seeing a big breakthrough. Is the weaponization of tariffs by Trump the reason why we saw a faster pace with which the deal has been concluded?
Well, the geopolitical landscape definitely helps with this. It is clear that we have had our, big partners before, but now the landscape is such that we need to build partnerships with those countries, those partners who believe in free trade, and definitely diversifying our trade portfolio on your side as well as our side is our mutual interest.
Interestingly, the president herself announced it at Davos, and there was a sharp reaction from the United States of America. Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary, has already said that Europe is funding indirectly the Russia-Ukraine war. Your comments?
Well, of course, countries like America don't like if we are also diversifying our trade portfolios. That's very clear. But again, we are focusing on the positive side. What more can we do in terms of trade in different areas? Of course, it's in our interest that this war in Ukraine stops, and therefore we have put sanctions on Russian shadow fleet, on different types, so that this war will end. And this doesn't change. I mean, we also had these discussions with the Indian counterparts, because it's in our mutual interest that this war will stop.
And being part of the Board of Peace?
Well, the Board of Peace eventually in the United Nations Security Council resolution was meant to be for Gaza and was meant to be limited in time until 2027. Also really showing the role for the Palestinians in it. Now, the Charter for the Board of Peace, what we see right now, is much broader than that. What we want to see is to be limited to Gaza, like the United Nations Security Council resolution, and then, of course, we are willing to work with all the institutions. Board of Peace, the International Stabilization Force, all these things to make peace in Middle East sustainable.
My final question to you, and I circle back to President Trump. Has he brought in a lot of volatility and unpredictability, and how is European Union going to counter or tackle that?
Unpredictability is clearly the word of the day. I think for the last year, what we have learned is that we have to expect a lot of unpredictability. But to counter that word, actually, for us, the European Union is predictability. That has been our weakness. I mean, we have often been the boring and very predictable. stable partner, but if I go around the world, this is actually becoming our strength. Countries like India, like other countries are looking at us because we are the stable partner. If we come to agreement, it may take time, that's true, but when we come to agreement, we stick to those agreements and keep our promises.
So predictability in an unpredictable world, is that what is being sought? Because sections in the US media are also writing that India-EU FTA is actually a rebuff to President Donald Trump and his team. So is there merit in the argument that despite this off-again, on-again negotiation since 2007, it's actually the Trump tariffs that pushed both India and the EU to conclude negotiations for the FTA? Will this encourage the United States to either see reason or double down? Joining me on India First is Professor Scott Lucas, who's a professor of US and international politics at the Clinton Institute University College of Dublin. Welcome. Professor Brahma Chilani is former advisor to India's National Security Council Secretariat. Ambassador Yash Sinha was India's High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. And Siddharth Zarabi is Group Editor, Business Today. And Siddharth, let me begin by asking you, Trump ensured or pushed India and the EU to quickly ink a deal. Is that how you look at it?
Well, I have the following response. This deal is a nail in the coffin of President Donald Trump's trade strategy vis-a-vis India. Even as we speak, Gaurav, and everyone can debate this, there's not a single law that India violated in importing Russian crude.
True.
It is not under a UN ban. We have bought it under legal channels. We have bought it within the price cap. So fundamentally, what the United States did with 25% and 25% was nothing short of trying to bulldoze us. It was trying to snatch away our national sovereignty, our freedom to take economic decisions as a completely dependent import country for our energy. And for a nation that snatches presidents out of their bedrooms or threatens to take over Greenland, I think it might be par for the course. But the larger ramification of this deal, called the mother of all trade deals, is that it puts completely to rest, in fact, buries the US strategy of sanctioning India for Russian oil purchases, what it has failed to do with China, and despite European continuing imports of gas. That said, let me also say, Gaurav, that it is clear, and you were talking about this and others have spoken about this, how will the US respond? Let me just say this. Even before this visit happened, the EU commissioner announced it as the mother of all deals in Davos.
Yes.
And that is where President Trump, in response to a question, also said that we will have a deal with India. And while EU is the largest trading partner for India, if the US deal comes, I personally believe this will prompt a deal, then that would be the father of all trade deals.
So that'll be the father of all trade deals. Well, that'll be advantage India and the US should that happen. I mean, considering the world's #1 economy and #4 economy, #2 economy and #4 economy, if they all have a deal together. But Professor Lucas, Bloomberg notes that the India-EU FTA is a rebuff to Donald Trump. Now, there's also conversation of sustained US tariffs, both on India and on EU. So, in your view, sir, to what extent will US trade coercion actually accelerate the conclusion of this off-again, on-again, long-stalled agreement between India and the EU?
Oh, that's the easiest question I'll have all day in a complicated world. The Trump's attempted bullying, both of Europe and of India and of other countries, was the catalyst for what is a win-win relationship. Since 2007, as you mentioned, India and the EU, despite the fact you potentially could get benefits on both sides, there are always barriers in terms of how to proceed. I want to take you back to February 2025. There were two things that coincided at that point, if you remember. You'll remember that Prime Minister Modi visited Donald Trump. Yes. And they talked about cooperation in space. They talked about a balanced trade agreement.
The compact.
At the same time, the compact, remember that. Now, at the same time, the European Union made a decision in February 2025. It was going to have to look to realign its relationships because of Trump. And they decided, look, we need to make a new effort in terms of being more accommodating to India on all these issues that we've had. Now, what happened less than 2 months later in April? That compact between the US and India is gone because of Trump's Liberation Day tariffs, which were chaotic at the start, and then they become systematic, the 25%, the 50% that you all know too well. Meanwhile, the EU has to face threats of 50, 35, 40%. Eventually, they've got 15% tariffs, but that deal is never completed.
Yes.
Let's take it back to the one other thing that happened. In April of 2025, when those tariffs hit, India and Pakistan had its confrontation. Now, we know that Pakistan went out of its way to say, oh, Donald Trump, you did a great job. You've saved us with peace here. We know that India did not do that, and we know that Trump got upset with Prime Minister Modi at that point. What you have is an unpredictable president and a unilateral American administration. It does not believe in alliances, and that made European Union and India rethink. And remember, not just on economies. Note the references today on cooperation over terrorism,
Yes.
over cyber,
Defense agreement.
and over resilience. This is going to go bigger than economics.
Very interesting you should mention that, and we'll talk about this in greater detail during the course of this conversation. But Professor, if I may, how do you see the US react? How do you predict? Will the US now, especially when it comes to India, move towards a trade deal, or perhaps double down and try and impose more tariffs?
How do you analyze the unpredictable? I mean, what type of mood will Donald Trump be in this morning with the combination of news like this and the setback that he's had over his attempted terrorism of Minnesota? I mean, we'll talk about that later. What kind of mood will his advisors be in? I think you've had to deal with the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick. Will he be wanting to deal, or will he come out and insult you, which he has done in the past? What about Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary? Logic would say that the Trump administration, having failed to bully Europe over Greenland in the past 2 weeks, having failed to bully India over this, logic would say that they rethink this and they try to be more cooperative. But you know what? Logic doesn't work with this administration. So I do not see this being leverage immediately for the Trump administration to say we'll have a trade deal. I think they're going to pose like they're the victims today.
Okay. Like Scott Bessent actually did, Ambassador Yash Sinha, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent accused this India-EU trade of indirectly financing the Ukraine war via Russian oil. So, in your view, will this trade deal lead to more bullying by the United States, both of Europe and of India?
Thank you, Gaurav. As far as I can see, this is an historic trade deal and both sides need to be congratulated. However, the reaction from the US, petulant or otherwise, I think the important thing is that India and the EU are de-risking from the chaotic global trade scenario where, the WTO has been stood on its head. And I think bilateral trade deals are obviously the flavor of the season. And this is the biggest that India has signed.
Yeah.
So I can understand why the United States is not particularly happy. But if, saner voices prevail in Washington, they will see the merit of signing even a bigger deal with India in the near future, rather than keeping it hostage to the whims and fancies of a few. And I think in this case, some of the statements emanating from Washington are particularly unhelpful. I'm talking about the core team, the inner team of President Trump has been particularly unhelpful. And India has been very mature, very restrained, and not reacted to such statements. But I think what India is doing, quietly pursuing its national interest and doing it very successfully.
That's a very interesting point, that India has been extremely mature in dealing with the United States of America. But Professor Chilani, Trump's threats of 30% tariffs on EU, the sustained 50% tariffs of India, they've actually destabilized the transatlantic trade. Is the India-EU FTA fundamentally a geopolitical counter a countermeasure to Trump tariffs. You know, as Ambassador Sinha put it, we're de-risking Donald Trump.
You're right, Gaurav. First, it's a democratic counterweight both to the China-centric trade model and to the Trump-driven weaponized trade strategy. The second is strategic diversification, both for India and for the EU. For India, it reduces over-reliance on the US and on China. And for the EU, it secures a foothold in the world's fastest growing major economy and also helps Brussels to de-risk its supply chains. And the third element is the security and defense integration with trade. Alongside the FTA, the two sides have signed a security and defense partnership. This is rare for the EU and marks a shift toward focus on maritime security cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. And also there's potential for joint defense manufacturing. But here, there are two things that, that we should keep in mind. First is, Trump's own contribution to the India-EU FTA. In his first term, allies and adversaries alike learned to discount much of what Trump said. His tweets contradicted policy, his threats were issued and withdrawn. In his second term, however, the pattern has changed. Disruption itself has become doctrine. His administration now treats uncertainty not as a risk to be managed, but as leverage to be exploited. And this shift is visible across domains. Trade policy is no longer governed primarily by economic logic, but by political coercion. Military power is no longer restrained by legitimacy concerns. The pattern is unmistakable. Trump no longer...
But has India been able to send out a message, India will not be bullied? Has EU been able to send out exactly the same message? And if I may, because both you and Professor Lucas have spoken of more than just a trade deal. Professor Lucas, you also spoke of the Strategic Defense Partnership Pact, the mobility agreement between EU and India. So in strategic doctrine terms, is the trade deal actually functioning as a security architecture tool, not just to counterbalance the United States, but also China's manufacturing dominance and China's dominance over supply chains?
I think the European Union has always put out the idea, even if it was imperfect, that economic cooperation in itself is security, because when you cooperate with each other, why would you attack each other? But I think they've had to go beyond that because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. And again, we're almost to the fourth anniversary of that. And that is, you can't just have functioning economies. You have to protect those economies with maritime security. You can't just have functioning economies. You've got to protect all your computer infrastructure, all your IT infrastructure with cyber operations. You can't just rely upon your economic activities. You also have to link them into defense production and defense investment, so that the dividing line used to be between NATO and the EU, NATO military, EU financial and economic. That's now disappearing. So I would again link up what India is doing and think of India's own security position, because you are very close to China. Yes. The European Union last year said they're going to do an 800 billion euro 5-year investment package in defense production and in defense manufacturing, part of which might come through other countries such as India. In other words, what you have is you have unpredictable, or let's put it bluntly, threatening challenges. I'm not saying they would come, but you have Russia, which has proven with its invasion of Ukraine that it does not believe in the global security order. You have China, where you hope you can compete with it economically, but you can't be sure because of its military prowess. And you have a Trump administration, which in its national security strategy last month no longer refers to allies. And a lot of that was, it's not referring to the European Union. That's correct. But you know what? It doesn't consider India an ally anymore as well. So where do you go with your economic security in a wider sense beyond trade at this point? And I actually would be interested in the panel's reaction to this. The other country that got insulted this past week heavily by Trump was Canada. Yes. Canada's looking to diversify its economic relationships. It has the trade agreement with the EU. Can Canada and India get over, and you know the tensions that have been in that relationship, can they overcome those tensions to try to move towards economic cooperation as well?
And is that happening, Siddharth? Because we hear of Canada and India trying to improve their relations. There's talk of their Prime Minister Mark Carney visiting India sometime soon. And the current FTA conversations between India and the EU, that's actually linking economies together. So 25% of global GDP, 1/3 of global trade. But from the security perspective, Siddharth, does this actually create a new middle power economic bloc, which is outside US, outside China, and other economies coming together? So EU, India, Canada, is that what's happening?
So Gaurav, if US trade policy and the weaponization of tariffs is the bull in the China shop, see the stunning turnaround that is being achieved with regard to India and Canada. Let me also say that the standout speech by far at the World Economic Forum was the Canadian leader's speech. And I think it resonated, and a lot of leaders there might have felt that he was actually speaking on their behalf. That's the world we live in. And it's clear to Canada, whose economic dependence and cooperation and reliance with the United States is known to everyone, for them to now look at as distant as a shore as India of how things have changed. What can we expect with regard to Canada-India trade? We believe that there will be a reset of that relationship that will translate immediately into some of the lowest hanging fruits with regard, again, to what we need from them and what they perhaps might want from us. Of course, some ticklish issues, problematic issues will remain there, but for now they will be brushed under the carpet. In the India-EU give and take, Gaurav, there are ticklish issues which for now have been brushed under the carpet. The EU has moved back from certain positions that it was adamant on. India has moved far ahead than what it was willing to consider even a year ago. I think that is the Trump effect on global trade. And if the multilateral world trade order, which has been built up over 40 years and driven by the United States and its powerful companies wanting market access, and they were hungry for billions of consumers all over the world, if that is splintering, the domino effect means that everyone is going out to try and strike a deal. I think to that extent, I believe that this is the fastest response, Gaurav, very quickly, that I have seen in terms of trade realignment for the past 30 years by any government in India. I think we must put on record the great flexibility, the political maturity, and the strategic sagacity shown by Prime Minister Modi in getting those 8 deals done, and also with the EU. And remember, it was Trump who said that we might get a deal done with India just last week. India is still silent. So I think we are in a great sweet spot, just as our economy is in a Goldilocks moment.
Is this a Goldilocks moment, Ambassador Yash Sinha, even in your appreciation that India, has kept its cool, India continues to negotiate, but your take, on Canada, India, EU, because some of these are also Five Eyes partners. Just last year, the situation was so different that some of them were breathing down India's neck, and suddenly, do you see a tactical reshift, or is this a strategic realignment?
I tend to echo what Mr. Zarabi said before me. I think the trade deal has to be seen not only in terms of the economic benefits, but that it's going to accrue to both sides, and that's quite substantial. It's also the whole environment that has been sort of changed because India, and though EU, and I must add, the Security and Defense Pact is important, but then the security and defense architecture in the EU is still at a very nascent stage. But then we have been careful because we have excellent bilateral relations and cooperation in the defense and security sphere with individual countries like France and Germany and Spain and Italy, etc. So I think this comes on top of our bilateral efforts with these countries. So I think We are in a sweet spot, certainly. The Indian economy, I mean, The Economist, which is supposed to be a very respected magazine, said that India's economy in the Goldilocks moment. But be that as it may, I think this sends out a very clear message that we will assiduously pursue our own national interests, and all the noise that is emanating outside is not going to distract us. And if I may add, that if we are friends and if we are allies, then you don't impose 50% tariffs and threaten to impose 500% tariffs on your friends and allies.
That's a very important point. That's a very, very significant point. You don't threaten friends, you don't threaten allies, you don't threaten people who you consider your own and who you need in the Indo-Pacific and to counter the threat that you think is the ultimate strategic threat. But Professor Chelani, European wines and spirits may become cheaper in India in times to come, but are we on the India-EU FTA negotiations? Are we popping the bubbly too soon? European Parliament has already delayed the US trade deal. Is the India-EU FTA also vulnerable to European domestic politics, to protectionist lobbies there, and to ratification risks?
The answer is yes, because this FTA will undergo quote-unquote legal scrubbing over the next 6 months, and the European Parliament will examine it minutely. And in fact, given the fact that the European Union is not a very united bloc, there could be dissenting voices in the European Parliament that could hold up the FTA with India. And we should not forget that Trump, all said and done, is a passing phenomenon. His term in office is limited. The EU is inextricably tied to the US, both economically as well as militarily. As the NATO chief yesterday cautioned, he said it's an illusion for Europe to be able to defend itself. It cannot on its own. So Europe is tied to the US. We should not forget that. India is the independent power. And also one other thing which is also quite interesting is that India, unlike other major economies, has a more domestically oriented economy that relies on domestic consumption, not exports for growth. So it's not an export-driven economy. It's relying on domestic consumption. It represents 18% of humanity with 1.4 billion people. So India is a world by itself. Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal said in 2024 that the existing FTAs that India has with Japan, South Korea, and ASEAN are hurting. He said hurting domestic industry.
Okay.
And he called them unfair agreements. Yet he now boasts about 8 different FTAs that India has concluded.
So let's see how this moves forward, in times to come, because, I just want to leave our viewers with what Ursula von der Leyen said when she said, when India succeeds, the world is more stable. So is this more about economics or a signal of re-engineering of global power balance? I want to thank all my guests. In China, President Xi Jinping continues to crack the whip. He's whittled down the powerful Central Military Commission, the CMC, now to just 2 of the members, Xi Jinping himself and General Zhang Youxia. The CMC comprises 7 top commanders who incidentally were all handpicked by President Xi Jinping and included his closest aide and confidant of decades, General Zhang Youxia, who's been axed just a couple of days ago. But then that process continues. All the generals down the chain of command who are considered very close to General Zhang, they're all now under the scanner. There are some reports that seem to indicate there are hundreds who are facing the axe. Thousands of officers who rose through the ranks under General Zhang, who was expelled over the weekend, are now facing scrutiny amidst wider corruption allegations linked to military procurement and promotions. This after China's defense ministry, it's finally confirmed. Of course, there's a very cryptic message that General Zhang Youxia, the vice chairman, is under investigation for what it calls are very grave violations of discipline and law. General Zhang is no ordinary general. He's 75 years old. He's a battle-hardened commander. He's one of the few top generals with combat experience. And until now, he was considered a long-time Xi Jinping loyalist and ally. Also under investigation is another top general, General Liu Zhenli. He's chief of CMC's Joint Staff Department, central to joint operations and joint war planning. So this move, actually, according to some analysts, leaves President Xi Jinping virtually alone at the apex of the military hierarchy. It raises very serious questions about how ready is PLA for battle or war when it comes to the Taiwan front. And joining me now for more on this big story is Lieutenant General S.L. Narasimhan, former member of India's National Security Advisory Board, former defense attaché in Beijing. Also with me, senior journalist and my colleague Sandeep Unnithan. General Narasimhan, in your appreciation, sir, how major is this crisis in China if Xi Jinping acts as General Zhang, once seen as a close confidant of decades, and hundreds being axed, hundreds others are under the scanner?
Good evening. Good evening, and thank you very much for having me on your show, Gaurav. I would like to say 2 or 3 things on this. One is, of course, the issue of the generals being sacked. It is not new in China. In the last decade, if you see, hundreds of generals have been sacked so far. So that is something which we need to understand. However, Zhang Youxia is a different case altogether. The reason is he and Mr. Xi Jinping go a long way in their life. Both their fathers were in the Communist Party leadership, and both of them have gone through a lot of hardships. So they have a lot of this born for me right from the word go. So, however, there have been rumors in the immediate past that the relationship between General Zhang Youxia and Mr. Xi Jinping has not been really good. But, however, nobody expected General Zhang Youxia to be arrested. The feeling was that probably he'll be eased out and things like that. Along with Liu Zhenli, who was the chief of joint staff, he has also been removed. And now Chang Shengmin is only the Central Commission for Disciplinary and Inspection gentleman, who has actually been feeding all this data, everything to Mr. Xi Jinping for all these purges. So basically now Central Military Commission is consisting of only 2 people, that is Mr. Xi Jinping and Mr. Chang Shengmin. That is one. Second thing, how does it affect the fighting capability of the PLA? Please understand the theater commands came into existence in 2016. So each theater command, the theater commanders are all in place. So each theater command can hold on its own. So that is something that we need to keep in mind. So, and also within the Central Military Commission to run their day-to-day operations, the officers and commission that they created in 2016 are fully capable of running the day-to-day functions of the Central Military Commission. Where they will probably be found wanting is in the forward planning and strategic thinking and planning, where they need more people to do that. So that
or higher direction of war. A higher direction of war, would that be adversely impacted? Let me also bring in Sandeep Unnithan. Sandeep, because there are all sorts of reports in the West, in other parts of the world, about leaking nuclear secrets to CIA, to corruption, to a coup in the works. But is there any clarity beyond that very, cryptic message of serious violation of discipline and law, the statement that comes in from China?
Well, Gaurav, we really don't know what the full story is. We are given to understand that, yes, he was leaking secrets, and that is very, very serious. The vice chairman of the Central Military Commission, as General Narasimhan mentioned, is a fellow princeling, one of Xi Jinping's closest associates in the Communist Party. If he's leaking nuclear secrets to the United States, then who in China is above suspicion? So that is a very, very serious allegation that's made against him. And, we have to look at this, as General Narasimhan mentioned, Gaurav, the higher direction of war. How is it going to be prosecuted when so many of your generals are corrupt? We've seen such shocking stories of PLA long-range missiles, the corruption within the rocket force, missiles filled with water, silos non-existent. So all of those shiny parades that we saw in September, just last year, one has to actually ask whether it's a machine that is capable of fighting a high-intensity combat of the kind it will need to fight against the United States over a invasion of Taiwan. And, to go back into Chinese history as well, Gaurav, you've seen what happened when the Qing dynasty fought the Japanese in the late 19th century. Ridden with corruption, they were defeated. The Kuomintang, when they were defeated by the disciplined communists between 1945 and 49, the Kuomintang was one of the most corrupt fighting forces, and that collapsed primarily because of corruption. They were selling US equipment on the black market. So China has had a history of very corrupt militaries that have collapsed because they were unable to fight.
Xi Jinping's entire effort, General Narasimhan, ever since he came to power, was to fight this corruption, and that is why he brought in his loyalists everywhere. What does this say? One, about Xi Jinping's leadership. Two, is he completely in control? Is he being challenged? Is he insecure? And that is why he's axing people, or he's ensuring that anybody who may ever be a threat to him is sorted out.
There are 3-4 things I want to mention here quickly. One is, of course, this coup story and the nuclear information story. The official information which has been put out doesn't cover any of this. These are all come from various sources which have been unconfirmed. And so I would say that such a senior general sitting in Central Military Commission as number 2, I really doubt whether he would have gone and shared something on the nuclear information with the US. And the coup story is also, again, not been sustained. I mean, since nothing as official has come out about it. And the third thing about missiles with water, which Sandeep had mentioned, I have a serious doubt about. These are all coming from various unconfirmed sources that, missiles were filled with water. I don't think any armed force would do that. They may do something else, but this is something which is beyond anybody's imagination. Now, coming on to your questions on Xi Jinping's leadership. Xi Jinping has come with the platform of corruption. The anti-corruption drive in China is not new. It started with Jiang Zemin in 1997, continued with Hu Jintao beyond that. However, the vigor with which Mr. Xi Jinping has gone after corruption was unforeseen in the history of China. In China, what used to happen is that anywhere people used to be arrested or punished in the military hierarchy, they were done after they retired, number one. The number 2 gentleman was the one in the governors and the provincial governors and all. The number 2 gentleman was the one who used to get targeted. However, everything changed when Mr. Xi Jinping came to power, and he has started, in fact, the number of Communist Party officials, the number of PLA generals and the officers who have been punished over a period of 14 years is unimaginable. Lakhs of them, actually speaking. However, corruption is something which has been deep-rooted, and so he's trying to still wipe it out. That is one issue. Second, there have been rumors or there have been information that probably he is also trying to wipe out the opposition by using the corruption handle, which again could be possible, but that is one issue. The third issue is whether he's in control. To me, it appears, if he, after sacking all these generals, all the ministers and all who sacked, still he is in power and still he is calling the shots. I think he has strengthened this position by doing all this. That is my understanding.
Okay, he strengthened his position. Sandeep, the Pentagon recently in a report inserted this very specific subheading, PLA corruption developments. Both you and General Narasimhan note that corruption is massive in the Chinese system. Probes have hit virtually every PLA service, and now the CMC itself, the highest military decision-making body. So how unusual or usual is it for the US to publicly flag internal Chinese military dysfunction at this level, or is this too part of CIA games?
Well, it's clearly PSYOPs, Gaurav, and when you have this kind of rampant corruption in your primary adversary, your near-peer adversary, then it's only natural for the United States to pick it up and publicize it. And given the fact that they have a very effective PSYOPs division, I'm sure they would be working overtime to show that China is not the the military behemoth that it claims to be. And this kind of corruption cases is exactly what the US would be looking out for, the weaknesses within the Chinese system, and the fact that the US is actually going after China in ways that we don't know of. We know that they are targeting their oil sources, like 50% of their cheap oil comes from Venezuela, Iran, and Russia, and the United States is going after China's oil supply. And this spate of corruption cases, the crackdown that Xi Jinping is doing, that gives them more ammunition in the fight against China, Gaurav.
So from psyops to economics and to lots more, the Pentagon report also warns that these removals could actually adversely impact the 2027 military modernization goals, including Taiwan contingency. So how fit for war is the Chinese army? And that's a story we'll be tracking very closely. General Narasimhan and Sandeep, for the moment, many thanks for joining me. This purge in China continues. Is China fit for war? We'll track that story. That is all I have for you on India First this evening.